So Wes, you've written a wonderful piece at issue 1 of Geocrat, ranking the intelligence agencies. Let's get right to it. Which agency is the best in the world these days?
And this was an ambitious question you posed to me, and I frankly think I answered it slightly differently than you posed it. In other words, I can tell you which should be the best. It's very difficult to say which is actually the best. In part, secrecy gets in the way in that, part of the complexity of the question. But in terms of how I set out the analysis, my conclusion, it's perhaps not surprising that the United States should be the best intelligence service in the world. They have the most resources, they have the most attention and most felt need for intelligence and so on. And then Israel, of course, also, which is one of the small set of states I decided to focus on, also comes up very high in that list, again, for similar sets of reasons. Although, interestingly, Israel and the United States score very closely together, but Israel is, of course, a very small state. The United States is a very great state. Israel has very kind of focused regional concerns. The United States has global concerns. So they're very different kinds of entities, but in the scoring that I put together, they come very close.
So the United States, in your analysis, should have the best intelligence capabilities. How does one reconcile that with some of the prominent mistakes they've made in the past?
Well, I suppose it could be considered an example of this very phenomenon, that because the United States, in a way, is so concerned with intelligence and so dependent on intelligence in some respects for its policy making, intelligence failures are inevitable, and this is part of the scholarship on the subject. So the combination of dependency and inevitability of failure means, and the fact that the United States is a democracy with a pretty impressive public media engine, inevitably their mistakes come out, full color, technicolor in the media. So we do see these mistakes.
Now, Wes, on your analysis, ironically, or to my mind, ironically, the democracies had the top intelligence agencies because of the criteria you used, and the totalitarian or autocratic states had less capable intelligence services. So the Chinese and the Russians and the Pakistanis, if you will, had lesser services. Do you think that's really so? Are the Russians and the Chinese that poor?
I could have set it up this way, but it wouldn't have been particularly objective on my part. I think it's actually a very impressive historical lesson that comes out of a broader kind of study of the evolution of intelligence services, and is something that I think in particular came to the fore during World War II, where this kind of idea of a distinction between totalitarian, authoritarian governments and regimes and their use of intelligence, and democracies and how they used intelligence, first came to the fore. In other words, if you think about the history of intelligence in World War II, what you see is a set of democratic states doing extremely well in intelligence and using intelligence, in fact, to help lead them to victory. And virtually all the authoritarian states that take part in World War II, either in the fascist camp or the Soviet Union on the other side, they all have terrible intelligence services. And they have terrible intelligence services because, at the end of the day, totalitarian regimes can't really tolerate that sort of truth-telling and independent function that intelligence services have to have. So democracies can still fail, and democracies can have very politicized intelligence processes, as we saw in Iraq.
And where does the Canadian intelligence capability, grosso modo, fit in your ranking? And
well,
why so?
I wasn't sure when I set up what I would think about this. And it's very hard to know, what is the distinction again between what people say about Canadian intelligence and what the reality is. Where it came out in the rankings at the end of the day, as I put in all these different kind of matrices, was that they were doing above average, but just okay in the kind of needs improvement sort of area. And in part that is because we have a reasonably well established and well functioning intelligence system, but we don't have that same sense of really needing intelligence, and we don't really have that political culture of attention to intelligence and wanting to get intelligence right. We respond to mistakes and errors and scandals, and we try and fix things, but we haven't yet kind of come to that political culture which Israel has, the United States has, even arguably Australia and certainly the UK have, where we think intelligence is important.
And out of curiosity, one of the agencies you didn't put, but that has somewhat of an interesting history, is the Iranian intelligence service, which is topical these days. Where would you rank them, or for what you know?
Well, the Iranians, I think, are like many regimes, have an intelligence service which is fundamentally skewed to internal security issues, and they don't have much of a footprint beyond their own borders. In other words, they serve, as did the KGB in the old days, as the sword and shield of the regime, to adapt the KGB's motto. So what they seem very effective at is internal suppression and monitoring, and to a certain extent support to terrorist groups that operate outside, as Iranian proxies perhaps. But as a sort of full-service intelligence system that tries to understand the world, I would say the Iranians are probably nowhere in that regard.
That's interesting. And one more question. As you look forward the next 10 years, given the changing state of the world, what are the big challenges in intelligence? How do these various capabilities that you've ranked improve?
I mean, technology is a big driver of intelligence, and technology is expensive, and using it as well is very, very difficult. So I think that's going to be one of the key challenges: who can keep up in the technological race. Which states can open themselves up more and more to intelligence, and the use of intelligence wisely is also a key challenge. And although in my ranking China falls below average in terms of its performance, I think as China increasingly comes to have a kind of sense of itself as a global power with global ambitions, it's got to improve its intelligence system. A state like Pakistan, which was the worst of all the services that I ranked, also has to get better if it's going to survive as a state. It has to get better in terms of dealing with internal security threats and dealing with regional neighbors. So there's some real challenges there in terms of international security, it seems to me.
Wesley Wark, thank you very much.
Thank you.